My daughter didn't waste a second on greetings. Her first words hit harder than any punch. "Dad, you have to leave the apartment right now. In 5 minutes, the police will be at your door. Evan is trying to set you up." The room seemed to lose its sound. I didn't panic, I didn't shout. I just stopped. Evan, my son, sat on the couch a few feet away, his phone in his hand, scrolling too slowly for someone actually reading. I kept my eyes on the television, said nothing into the receiver except, "Bad connection, try again later," and ended the call. Then I stood, stretched as if old bones demanded it, and walked toward the coat rack. "Going to grab some milk," I said. "We already have milk," Evan replied without looking up. "Then I'll get bread." I slid on my jacket, pocketed my keys, and stepped into the hallway. 2 floors down, I cut through the laundry room to the alley exit. The cold evening air hit me like truth. I answered my daughter's second call only once I was halfway down the block. "Talk. Don't go back," she said quickly. "Mom's with me. We're driving over, but you can't be there when they arrive. He put something in your desk. Called it an insurance policy. I heard him telling Claire last night. He said once the police find it, you're finished." "How long ago did he say that?" "Less than an hour. And Dad? He sounded like he's been planning this for weeks." I kept walking, voice steady. "Go to the diner on 5th. Back booth. And don't text or call me until you're there." I hung up before she could argue. Running would make me look guilty. Walking made me look in control. I covered 5 blocks in under 10 minutes, stepped into the diner that still thought it was 1987, and slid into my usual seat in the back, facing the street. At 4:15 p.m., just as she'd warned, a patrol car passed my building on Maple. I pictured the scene without having to see it. Polite knock, then a search, then the discovery in my desk. Evan's rehearsed surprise, Claire's sympathetic shake of the head, and then the ride downtown with my hands in steel. I stirred my coffee but didn't drink it. My daughter and my ex-wife arrived 6 minutes later. My daughter was pale. My ex-wife was not. She had always been the colder one. "What exactly did you overhear?" I asked. My daughter swallowed. "Last night on the balcony. He told Claire, once they find the drive, it's over. Told her not to worry, you'd fold like paper. He laughed when she asked about fingerprints." I looked at the clock. 4:22 p.m. "You're both going home after this," I said. "You won't call him, you won't text anyone. And if anyone asks, you haven't seen me." "What are you going to do?" my ex-wife asked. "What I always do," I said. "Watch, then act." I left cash for the coffee and walked into the fading daylight. Heading for the small office I kept above a locksmith on 3rd. Inside, I locked the door, shut the blinds, and opened the safe. The contents were boring to anyone but me. An old laptop, a spiral notebook, a thumb drive labeled Map. On the laptop, I opened the drive. Folders appeared, photos of every drawer, every shelf in my apartment, all dated and time-stamped. My insurance policy. I clicked to the desk folder. 2 drawers on the right, 1 on the left. In the latest shot, the left drawer held a legal envelope with a red sticker. I hadn't placed it there. I noted the time in my notebook. 4:15 p.m. Probable entry. Then, they expect me to panic. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Mr. Hale." The voice was young, unsure. "I'm with the precinct. We'd like you to come in for a few questions." "What's this about?" "A report was filed. We can send a car to pick you up." "I'm not hard to find," I said, and hung up. Then I wrote, 4:24 p.m. Call from precinct. Not a detective. The plan was forming piece by piece. I'd let them make the next move, and then I'd make the last one. I stayed in that office until the streetlights blinked on. The city outside trading its gray daylight for the yellow hum of night. I wasn't hiding. Hiding means you're afraid. I was waiting. Waiting gives you time to see the shape of what's coming. The first step was to confirm the evidence Evan had planted. My apartment had cameras. He didn't know about them because I never told him. Two were obvious, in the hallway and kitchen, but the third was built into the desk lamp in my study. It wasn't live streaming anywhere. It just stored footage on a local drive under the false bottom of a filing cabinet. By 7:20 p.m., I was back in the building, entering through the basement service door. Tenants never used it, only repairmen and delivery guys, and the security cameras in that corridor had been out of order for the last 2 months. I'd made sure of that. I climbed the stairs, listening. My apartment door was closed, deadbolt turned, just as I'd left it. I unlocked it and stepped inside slowly, scanning the air the way some men read a room. No voices, no movement. The place smelled faintly of leather and the burnt scent of an extinguished candle. In the study, I went straight to the filing cabinet, popped the false bottom, and took out the small hard drive. On the kitchen counter, I hooked it to my laptop and opened the folder marked simply CAM03. The footage from earlier that day played without sound. The timestamp told me it was 3:47 p.m. Evan entered with a slim backpack. His posture was all business. Straight to the study, no hesitation. He put the backpack on my desk, unzipped it, and took out a legal envelope, the one with the red sticker. He slid it into the left drawer, checked his watch, then pulled on gloves and used a folded cloth to wipe the drawer handle. Claire appeared in the doorway, frowning. He said something, his mouth forming the words "stop touching," and she stepped back, rolling her eyes. Then he left, the whole operation taking under 4 minutes. I copied the footage twice, once to my thumb drive, once to a separate cloud account. Evidence was only as good as its redundancy. Next came the question of the envelope itself. I considered removing it now, but that would break the chain of their mistake. Better to let it sit until they came for it again. People who plant evidence rarely resist the urge to check, if it's still there. That check is when they make their real mistake. I locked up and returned to my office, making notes in the spiral. 3:47 p.m. Evan places legal envelope in left desk drawer. Wipes handle. Claire present. No direct contact with envelope. Do not remove yet. At 8:05 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, the number belonged to my son. I let it ring out, then played the voicemail. His tone was the same one he used as a teenager when lying about where he'd been on a Friday night. "Dad, call me back when you get this. We need to talk. Something came up, and I think it's best if you just explain yourself to the police now before things get worse." Things getting worse for who? I didn't call him back. Instead, I called a different number, an old contact, the kind of man who doesn't appear in phone books. He'd once been a private investigator, now just retired. Though retirement in his case meant taking cash jobs for people who didn't want questions asked about their questions. "Grant," I said when he answered. "I need a quiet look at a couple of names. No official channels." "You in trouble?" he asked. "Not yet. And if you do this right, not at all." I gave him Evan's and Claire's full names, birth dates, and the address of the apartment they shared. Also, I added, "Any financial activity in the last month that looks unusual." He grunted. "Unusual how?" "The kind that requires a sudden windfall," I said. "Got it." I ended the call and stared at the notebook. The smart move was to stay out of their way, let them think I was running scared. Fear makes people sloppy. Sloppiness makes them visible. By 9:30 p.m., Grant had already sent me the first piece. A flagged account under Claire's name, a deposit of $15,000 just 3 days ago from an entity called Midland Realty Partners. The name meant nothing to me, but the number did. It was exactly the kind of finder's fee a developer might pay for delivering a property without the messy delays of negotiations. Now I had motive. All I needed was the paper trail. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Evan thought this was a sprint, plant, accuse, collect. But I'd been walking this track for decades, and I knew it was a marathon. The more he thought I was cornered, the more space I had to move. Tomorrow I'd let him see me. Not enough to talk to, just enough to know I hadn't disappeared. And then I'd watch him try to figure out why. The next morning, I didn't wake up in my apartment. I woke up on the leather couch in my office above the locksmith. the faint smell of machine oil drifting up through the vents. I'd slept light, the kind of sleep you keep when you know you might need to move fast. At 6:45 a.m., I poured myself coffee from the old percolator and opened my notebook. There were 2 goals for the day. Let Evan see me, just enough to make him nervous. Learn exactly who Midland Realty Partners was and why they'd paid Claire. I started with the second. Grant was already awake when I called. Midland's a shell, he said without preamble. Front for a developer group out of Chicago. They buy up residential buildings, flip or tear down, resell for profit. And they like clean deals, no stubborn owners to negotiate with. Any connection to Evan? I asked. Indirect, Grant said. Claire's brother works for them as an acquisition coordinator. Looks like he put her name down for a referral fee. Translation, they get the apartment, she gets a cut. $15,000 to betray your father. It was almost insulting. At 8:10, I left the office and walked toward my building, taking the long way so I'd pass the cafe Evan liked. Sure enough, he was there, seated at a window table with Claire. I didn't slow my pace. I just glanced through the glass as I passed. His eyes lifted from his coffee, and for a fraction of a second, our gazes met. No nod, no smile. I kept walking, and I knew I'd just planted my own seed in his head. He's still here. By 8:30, I was inside my apartment. The envelope was still in the desk drawer. I didn't touch it, just checked that the desk lamp camera's angle was unchanged. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, opened the footage from yesterday again, and took a still frame of Evan holding the envelope. That image alone wouldn't save me in court, but paired with the timeline, the insurance became evidence against him. At 9:12, there was a knock at the door. Not the hard, official kind. This was casual, almost neighborly. I opened it to find Claire. Evan's worried about you, she said, her tone syrupy. He thinks maybe you misunderstood. Tell Evan, I said. I'll speak to him when I'm ready, not before. Her smile faltered. The police will. They already called. I interrupted. And I'm sure they'll call again. I closed the door before she could reply. A test. She'd been sent to feel out my mood. Evan wanted to know if I was rattled. I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. At 11 a.m., Grant texted, pulled property records. Your building's ownership just transferred, as of yesterday afternoon, to a holding company tied to Midland Realty. That explained the rush. Evan and Claire weren't just after my apartment. They were helping to clear out tenants for the new owner. The envelope in my desk was their tool to make me voluntarily vacate without legal fights. I spent the next 3 hours preparing my counterplay. First, I printed 3 copies of the desk lamp footage stills. Then I wrote a short, precise statement, no accusations, just dates, times, and observations. Facts don't invite arguments. They invite doubt in the other side's story. At 3 p.m., I went to see an old neighbor, Mrs. Rourke, who'd lived in the building since the 70s and knew every trick landlords and buyers had tried over the years. She agreed to keep a small envelope for me, unopened, with her signature across the seal. Inside was a copy of my evidence. You're making a move, aren't you? She asked. Not yet, I said. I'm just moving the pieces into place. By evening, I was back in my office, watching the street from the window. At 7:46 p.m., Evan's car pulled up outside my building. He went in alone. 20 minutes later, he came out again, walking faster, his shoulders tight. I checked the footage later. As I suspected, he'd opened the desk drawer, stared at the envelope, touched it with his gloved hand, and then left it exactly where it was. He was checking, making sure his trap was still armed. Good. Let him believe it was working. Every trap needs bait. Tomorrow I'd set mine. The following morning, the sky was a dull slab of gray, heavy enough to make the air feel close. Perfect weather for blending into the background. I didn't want sunlight. I wanted shadows that made people second-guess if they'd really seen me. At 6:30 a.m., I was in the diner on 5th, same back booth, sipping black coffee and pretending to read the paper. My phone sat face down on the table, recording. Grant had agreed to meet me here, and when he slid into the seat across from me, he didn't waste time. "They're moving fast," he said. "Midland filed for an expedited vacancy order on 3 other units in your building. If they get you out quietly, the rest will fall like dominoes." "And Evan and Claire?" I asked. "They're in deep." Claire's brother put both their names in an internal email about facilitating transitions. That's corporate code for clearing people out. Looks like your apartment is their big win, high square footage, prime resale. I stirred my coffee, thinking about the 15,000 Claire had already pocketed. And they expect me to hand it over like I'm signing for a package. "Which brings me to this," Grant said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were printouts, bank transactions, emails, and one particularly interesting contract draft with a line highlighted. "Tenant agrees to vacate premises without compensation in exchange for dismissal of criminal charges." "They wrote the script before the play started," I said quietly. Grant nodded. "And they think you'll just read your lines." I left the folder on the table until we were done eating, then tucked it under my arm as I paid and walked out. Step 1 of my plan was already in motion. Make them aware that I was not hiding but also not reacting. People like Evan expect confrontation, they feed off it. Deny them that, and they start to wonder what you're planning. At 9:05 a.m., I walked past the cafe again. Evan was alone this time, tapping nervously at his phone. I slowed just enough for him to notice me in the reflection of the glass. His head jerked up, but I kept walking, my hands in my coat pockets. By mid-morning, I was back in my apartment. I set up my own insurance in plain sight. A second envelope, identical to the one Evan had planted, but containing nothing more than blank paper. I placed it in the same drawer in front of his. The desk lamp camera caught every detail. If he opened the drawer and touched the wrong envelope, I'd have him on video handling something that wasn't there before. At 2 p.m., my daughter called. She sounded worried. "Dad, Evan says you've been showing up places. He thinks you're trying to intimidate him." "Good," I said. "Let him think that. Why not just go to the police now? Show them the video? Because a single piece of evidence is fragile. I want more than enough so that when this breaks, there's no way back for him. Not even a story he can tell himself." By late afternoon, the second stage of my plan was ready. I called an old friend who worked at a local paper. She owed me a favor from years back when I'd helped her cover a messy landlord dispute. Hypothetically, I asked, "How interested would you be in a story about a development company paying tenants' relatives to plant evidence and clear them out?" Her answer was one word: very. We agreed she'd wait for my signal, and for a package I'd send her with full documentation. No rush, I told her. Timing was everything. That night, I didn't return to my apartment. Instead, I stayed in my office, watching the live feed from the desk lamp camera. At 8:17 p.m., there he was, Evan, gloves on, opening the drawer. He hesitated, then touched the front envelope, mine. Pulled it halfway out, frowned, and pushed it back. He never touched his own envelope behind it. I smiled. The seed of doubt had sprouted. Now he didn't even trust the trap he'd set. Tomorrow, I'd give him reason to think it was already failing. By morning, I knew exactly what the next step needed to be. Not a blow, not yet, but a whisper that would echo loud in Evan's head. People rarely crumble under direct attack. They crack when they believe the ground beneath them is shifting. At 7:05 a.m., I walked into the cafe Evan favored, ordered a coffee to go, and took the seat closest to the counter. I didn't have to wait long. He came in 15 minutes later, wearing the same navy coat I'd seen yesterday. His eyes landed on me immediately. I gave him the smallest nod, then set my phone face down on the table as if I'd just finished a call. He hesitated, ordered his drink, and left without sitting. I knew he'd be wondering, who had I been talking to? And more importantly, what about? Back at the office, I called Grant. "Time for phase 2, I said. Grant chuckled. "You really want to squeeze him? Until the air's gone." We agreed he'd accidentally run into Claire at the grocery store she liked. Drop a vague comment about seeing me with some legal papers yesterday. No specifics. Just enough to travel back to Evan with embellishments. By noon, my phone buzzed, my daughter again. Dad, did you hire a lawyer? I let the question hang. Why? Evan says he saw you with documents. He's acting nervous. He won't tell me why. Then don't ask him, I said. Just watch. After hanging up, I began assembling the package for the journalist. The folder now included still frames from the desk camera of Evan planting the envelope, the video clip of him returning to check on it, Grant's printouts of the Midland Realty connection, a timeline of every movement since the first warning call from my daughter. But I didn't send it yet. The timing wasn't right. The story needed to break when they felt safest, not while they were still building their trap. At 4 p.m., I took a slow walk to my apartment. The hallway outside my door was quiet. Inside, the air felt undisturbed. I went to the study and checked the drawer. Both envelopes were there, untouched since last night. Perfect. I opened my laptop, loaded the live camera feed, and set it to record continuously to the cloud. If anything happened while I was gone, I'd see it. At 6:23 p.m., the feed lit up movement in the study. Evan alone this time. He opened the drawer, looked at the front envelope, then at the back one. His jaw tightened. He pulled his own envelope out, slid it into his backpack, and left without a word. I leaned back in my office chair, exhaling slowly. The removal meant one of two things. Either he believed I'd tampered with it, or he was planning to replant it somewhere else. Somewhere the police could find it without me having the chance to interfere. Good. Let him move it. Every relocation was another chance for him to be caught on camera somewhere outside my control. At 8:10 p.m., Grant called. Claire's brother just wired another $5,000 to her account. That's on top of the $15,000. Which means they're still confident, I said. Perfect. That night, I didn't bother sleeping. Instead, I reviewed every frame from the camera, noting the exact times Evan had entered and left. The tighter the timeline, the harder it would be for him to explain later. By dawn, the plan for tomorrow was clear. Let him think I was backing down, let him believe he'd gotten away with removing the evidence, and then introduce a new piece of information he couldn't ignore. In this kind of game, you don't win by striking first. You win by making your opponent believe the fight was over, right before you end it. By 6 a.m., the streets were still quiet, a thin mist curling around the lampposts. I left the office early, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be seen. Visibility in moments like this was its own form of pressure. I stopped at the corner bakery near Evan's building, somewhere I'd never gone before, bought a loaf of bread I didn't need, and lingered long enough for a few neighbors to see me. Word travels faster through casual sightings than through phone calls. At 7:15 a.m., I walked past the cafe. Evan wasn't there. That alone told me something. Routine breakers always have a reason. Instead of circling back, I kept going toward my apartment. The hallway was quiet when I arrived. I unlocked the door and stepped in, scanning everything with the same slow attention I'd use reading a stranger's eyes. The drawer was empty. Both envelopes, mine and his, were gone. I smiled. Removing both meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. The problem for Evan was that I'd already built a net wide enough to catch them. The lamp camera footage, the timestamps, the witness in the building who'd seen him enter last night. All of it was intact. The only thing missing was the final thread that tied motive to method. I knew exactly where to get it. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called my contact at the journalist's office. We're moving up the timeline, I told her. But I want one more piece in place before I hand you everything. What's the piece? She asked. A recorded conversation. Grant was in on the plan immediately. By noon, he'd arranged to accidentally meet Claire's brother at a property networking lunch. He'd wear a wire, keep the questions light, and let the man brag about his latest acquisition bonuses. While Grant was setting that up, I planted my own seed. I called Evan from a payphone 3 blocks away, a deliberate choice. Payphones carry the scent of secrecy. He answered on the second ring, voice tight. Where are you? Still in town, I said. And I know about Midland Realty. There was a pause. You don't know what you're talking about. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said calmly. Enjoy your day. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't need him to admit anything. I needed him to feel the ground shift. That discomfort would push him to make his next move faster, before he had time to think it through, and that's when people step into their own traps. By 4 p.m., Grant sent me a single text. Got it. You'll like this one. The audio he delivered an hour later was better than I'd hoped. Claire's brother, 2 beers in, bragging about a sweet payout from clearing a stubborn tenant. All thanks to family connections who knew exactly how to get leverage. He even named Claire and her husband Evan before the recording ended. It was the perfect bridge, motive tied directly to action, from someone inside the operation. That evening I went to the diner. My daughter was already there, fidgeting with a napkin. I slid into the booth across from her. I've got enough to end this, I told her. But you can't be involved when it happens. Dad, I just want this over, she said. He's my brother. But, she trailed off, unable to finish. I know, I said quietly. But sometimes, ending it is the only way forward. I didn't stay long. By the time I returned to my office, I had the package ready. Evidence, recordings, photos, and a clear timeline. All I had to do was decide exactly when to release it. Too soon, and they'd scramble into damage control. Too late, and they might do something worse to cover their tracks. No, the release needed to land at the exact moment they believed they'd finally won. Tomorrow, I'd make them believe just that. The morning began with a calculated absence. No sightings of me near the cafe. No chance encounters in the hallway. I wanted Evan to think I was finally retreating. That's the thing about predators. When the prey stops running, they assume it's safe to feast. At 10:15 a.m., Grant called. They've scheduled a meeting this afternoon with Midland's acquisition lawyer. 2 o'clock. Claire and Evan both attending. Location: Midland's downtown office. That was perfect. It meant they'd be away from the building long enough for me to set the stage. At noon, I went to see Mrs. Rourke. She answered the door in her usual robe, hair tied back. Is it time? She asked, handing me the sealed envelope I'd given her days ago. Almost, I said, but I need you to do one more thing for me. Tell Evan you saw me leaving the building this morning with a suitcase. Her eyes lit up with mischief. You want him thinking you skipped town? Exactly. And make it sound like I was in a hurry. By 12:30, she'd done her part. I know because my daughter called me. Confusion in her voice. Dad, Evan says you're gone. Are you? I'll see you soon, was all I gave her before hanging up. At 1:15, I entered my apartment. The first thing I did was open the study drawer, empty just as before. Then I placed a fresh envelope inside. But this one contained a printed copy of the audio transcript from Claire's brother, word for word, with his name in bold at the top. On the outside of the envelope, I wrote, "For Detective Wallace." I positioned the desk lamp camera to capture the drawer perfectly and left the apartment without locking the door. That was the invitation. By 1:58, Evan and Claire were in their meeting, smiling across a polished boardroom table. Grant had a contact in the building who sent me a photo from the lobby, proof they were occupied. I used that window to slip back into my apartment via the service entrance, close the door quietly, and wait in the dark corner of the living room. At 2:47, the door opened. Evan stepped inside, alone. He moved quickly to the study, opened the drawer, and froze when he saw the envelope. He read the label, then yanked it out and tore it open. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and his breathing changed, quick, shallow. He stuffed the contents into his backpack, slammed the drawer, and left, his footsteps sharp against the hallway tile. The camera caught everything, the label, his face, the act of removing the transcript meant for the police. Now, his fingerprints were on my document, which detailed his conspiracy. By 3:30, I'd uploaded that footage to the secure folder for the journalist. I also prepared 3 anonymous email drafts, one to the local police precinct, one to the paper, and one to Midland Realty's legal department, all scheduled to send simultaneously. At 5:12 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Dad, We need to talk. Evan's voice cracked, like he was forcing calm but couldn't hold it. About what? I asked. I think we've both made mistakes. I haven't, I said and ended the call. That night, I sat in the office, the emails queued, the journalist waiting for my signal. I pictured Evan and Claire clinking glasses, believing the meeting had secured their prize. Tomorrow morning, they'd wake to find their names on every screen in the city, attached to words they'd never escape. I didn't need to rush. The trap was closed. All that was left was to pull the rope. At 6 a.m., I pressed send. The 3 emails flew out together like arrows loosed from the same bowstring. One to Detective Wallace at the precinct, containing the desk lamp footage, the still frames, the timeline, and the transcript of Claire's brothers bragging. One to the journalist with the same package plus every document tying Midland Realty to the payout. And one to Midland's legal department, because nothing makes a corporation panic like a paper trail that could drag them into criminal court. Then I waited. It didn't take long. At 7:42 a.m., the first call came, the journalist. "This is gold," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Publishing within the hour. I'll send you the draft before it goes live." At 8:03 a.m., Detective Wallace called. "Mr. Hale, are you available to come in today? We've received some interesting material regarding your son." "Of course," I said, "but I imagine you'll want to speak to him first." By 8:15, I was parked across the street from Evan's building. The blinds in his apartment were still drawn. At 8:26, Claire appeared in the window, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. She froze when 2 unmarked cars pulled up in front of the building. 4 officers got out and headed inside. I didn't need to see the rest to know how it played out. Evan would open the door with his practiced look of surprise, but the moment Detective Wallace mentioned the words planting evidence, that expression would falter. And when they asked him about the transcript, the one with his fingerprints on it, he'd know there was no way to spin this. At 9:02, my phone buzzed again. This time, the journalist. She'd sent me the link to the article. Developer scheme uncovered. Family members paid to oust elderly tenant. Evan and Claire's names were in the second paragraph, along with Claire's brothers. The photo from my desk lamp camera, Evan's face clear, hand in the drawer, was the lead image. By 9:15, Midland's legal department had emailed me directly, offering to discuss a mutually agreeable resolution regarding my tenancy. I didn't respond. Let them stew. At 10:40, my daughter called. Her voice was trembling, but not from fear. "Dad, it's everywhere. His friends are calling me, people from work. He's saying you set him up." "I didn't," I said flatly. "I just let him finish what he started." The rest of the day I stayed out of sight. This wasn't the time to gloat, not in public. Revenge is best served cold, but it also tastes better when you don't smear it on your own face. By 4 p.m., I had confirmation. Evan had been released pending investigation, but the charges were stacking. Claire's brother had gone quiet, and Midland Realty had announced an internal review of acquisition practices. And me? I still had my apartment, my records, my quiet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Evan had once done his homework on as a boy. I thought about the call from my daughter that started it all. 5 minutes warning to escape a frame job. 5 minutes that turned into the cleanest reversal I'd ever pulled. They'd wanted me gone without a trace. Instead, they'd written their own ending. Tomorrow, I'd decide whether to press for full prosecution or just let the public ruin finish the job for me. Either way, I'd already won. The next morning, I didn't rush to check the news. I already knew the fire was burning. I'd lit it myself. Instead, I made breakfast the slow way: eggs, bacon, black coffee. Every sizzle of the pan was a reminder that my kitchen was still mine. At 7:18 a.m., the first knock came. Not police. Courier. He handed me a thick envelope from Midland Realty's law firm. Inside was a formal settlement offer, generous on paper, insulting in spirit. They were willing to compensate me for my inconvenience with a lump sum and assist in relocation if I agreed to leave the apartment quietly and withdraw any allegations of misconduct against their employees. I set the offer on the table and didn't touch it again. The very fact they'd put that in writing told me they were scared. By 8:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. A call from Grant. "He's trying to reach you," he said. "Evan?" "Yeah. For calls to your number already. Left one voicemail. You want to hear it?" "No. But I want you to forward it to Detective Wallace." Grant laughed. "You're not even curious?" "I don't need to be. Curiosity is for people who still care about the answer." At 9 o'clock, the journalist called again. "Midland's PR team is in damage control mode. They're pushing statements about rogue employees. Your son and his wife are named directly as the ones who acted without company authorization. Translation: they're cutting them loose to save themselves. That was better than any jail sentence. Isolation has a way of crushing people faster than bars ever could." Still, I wasn't done. At 10:45, I took a walk to the precinct. The front desk officer directed me to Detective Wallace's office. He was waiting with a printout of the transcript and the still frames from my camera. "You've given us more than enough to move forward," he said. "But I have to ask, what do you want out of this?" "I want the truth on record," I told him. "I want the attempt documented so they can't rewrite it later. After that, the consequences are yours to decide." Wallace nodded. "Fair enough. And Mr. Hale?" "Not many people play it this smart." Smart wasn't the word for it. Prepared was. I'd spent my life learning that most threats dissolve under light. You just have to make sure you control the switch. At noon, I returned to my building. In the lobby, Mrs. Rourke was waiting, a sly smile on her face. "Saw Evan earlier," she said. "He didn't look too pleased." "I imagine not. He asked me if you were moving out," she added. "I told him no. Told him you just bought a new lock." "Good woman." Upstairs, I locked my apartment door and went to the study. The desk drawer was empty again. But now that emptiness was mine. I sat down, opened my laptop, and watched the last clip I'd saved of Evan in this room. The hesitation in his movements, the way his eyes darted like a man hearing footsteps behind him. That was the real victory. By late afternoon, the article had been picked up by 2 national outlets. Evan and Claire's faces were now public property, their names permanently attached to a developer scheme gone wrong. And as any lawyer could tell them, Google never forgets. At 6:15 p.m., my daughter called. She didn't sound relieved. Not yet. But there was a hint of something lighter in her voice. "I know he's my brother," she said. "But I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you still have your home." "I told you," I said quietly. "I don't fold." After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The game was effectively over, but there was still one final card I could play. Something that would make sure they couldn't rebuild their lives on the rubble they tried to make of mine. Tomorrow I'd play it. I woke before dawn, not from worry but from habit. The kind of habit you develop after decades of watching your own back. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and laid out the last of my cards. This final move wasn't about the police or the press or even the building. This was about making sure Evan and Claire couldn't crawl out from under the weight of what they'd done and pretend it was just a misunderstanding. At 7:15 a.m., I called the journalist. "I'm sending you something that didn't make the first package," I told her. "More evidence?" she asked. "Not exactly. Perspective." I emailed her a letter I'd written the night before. A first-person account from the moment my daughter warned me until the morning the police arrived at Evan's door. No bitterness, no embellishment, just cold, verifiable detail. The kind of peace that makes readers feel they're standing in the room, watching the betrayal unfold. She promised it would run as a follow-up, paired with the evidence they'd already published. Next, I called a contact in a property rights advocacy group. They'd been fighting predatory evictions for years, always looking for cases that showed the human cost. I gave them permission to use my story, my footage, my name. Let Evan and Claire see themselves not just in news articles, but in pamphlets, campaign videos, and lectures about exploitation. Immortality in all the wrong ways. At 10 a.m., I met with Detective Wallace one last time. He confirmed that charges were proceeding: obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted coercion. Claire's brother was also facing scrutiny for facilitating the scheme. "They're not going to prison tomorrow," Wallace said. "But this will follow them everywhere. Employers, banks, landlords, nobody wants to get near this kind of stink." "That's good enough," I told him. And it was. Prison can be temporary. Reputation lasts forever. By early afternoon, the follow-up article was live. My letter appeared in full, and the headline pulled no punches: 5 minutes to escape a family trap. How one man turned the tables. The comments flooded in. People outraged. Others sharing their own stories. Some just stunned at the calculated patience of the revenge. My inbox lit up with messages from strangers thanking me for showing that you don't have to yell to win. At 3:40 p.m., my daughter stopped by. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. "I don't know how you stayed so calm through all of this," she said. "Calm isn't the same as doing nothing," I replied. "It's the difference between a storm and the tide. The storm shouts. The tide just comes in, and nothing can stop it." She hugged me before leaving. By evening, I sat at the same kitchen table where this had begun. The apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about Evan. Whether he was packing to leave the city, or hiding behind drawn curtains, or pacing in some lawyer's office trying to rewrite the story in his own head. None of it mattered now. He kept my home. He kept my name. And I'd made sure his was buried under the truth, where no half-truth or apology could dig it out. Revenge, I'd learned long ago, isn't about anger. Anger burns too fast. It's about patience, precision, and knowing when to close the door. And tonight the door was closed.